Welcome back to the channel. This is the Action Figure Grader, and today's video is going to cover mint-to-on-card vintage Star Wars figures that sold on eBay, either at auction or in buy it nows. We've got everything from early 12 backs that sold for some really great prices. As you can see by this thumbnail, we had one of those shrink-wrapped Sears exclusive Kenner Canada figures. This was the Dengar, and it was a mint on card. It was graded CAS 60, sold for what I consider to be probably about the right price. 3 different Boba Fett sold, including a Kenner Canada version that you see here. Some Power of the Force, even got a Hungarian bootleg that sold mint on card. The Tri-Logo Yoda was an orange snake Yoda. Those are very tough to find, and despite it not being in the best condition, it still sold for a big number. So really appreciate the channel support. I hope that everyone is doing well. And let's go ahead and take a closer look. We're going to start off with some 12 backs. Gold Star Tech had a 12 back A Han Solo small head. Unpunched, no price sticker, AFA 80. What a beauty. Really nice example. The card score was a 75, but the blister and figure were 80 and 85 respectively. Very clean example at auction. And it sold for $37.27. $37.27, 32 bids on that one. And I think all of these will give a pretty good gauge as to what, you know, a pretty high grade example will do. And then we're going to see what happens in the Hakes auction with those really high grade examples and compare and contrast and see how the prices look for a lot of those early card backs that end on January 22nd. I can't wait to see what the final prices look like. And then here was a CAS 80 for Chewbacca. This one was a 12A with the SKU on the footer stand. That is the earliest of the early card backs. You can see between Chewbacca's legs there on that footer. It does have the SKU on the footer. Card 70, blister 80, figure 85 again. Exact same subgrades as the Han. This, of course, is a CAS 80, and that one sold for $19.75, which I thought was a pretty good deal for a 12A Chewbacca. That's, you know, it was a punched example, but that's a pretty fair deal if you ask me for the earliest 12-back A Chewbacca. Here was a 12-back B Darth Vader. This one was graded AFA 80+, another punched example. That one sold for $24.31. That was about what I expected. I was thinking $2,500-ish, just based on some recent sales that I found. Card 85, blister and figure were 80. And so you got some really nice early card backs there that were in fairly high grade that sold at auction, to give you a pretty good idea of where things are shaking out right now in terms of auction prices. This seller had some ungraded examples. These were 12Cs. This was a C-3PO. The C-3PO was in pretty darn good shape. I mean, I'm not sure what this one would grade. If I had to guess, it would pretty easily get an 80 grade for this C-3PO. And that one sold for $891 for a 12C ungraded. You can see the blister there is in very good shape. And, you know, the back of the card was pretty clean. I didn't really see much wrong with it. I think it would pretty easily get straight 80s. Maybe a little bit of rippling at the very top of the blister there, but that's about it. I mean, that's a pretty clean example for the 12C C-3PO, $891 in an auction. Great deal there. And this Jawa was also a 12C. This one was not as clean. As you can see on the top left-hand side of the card, it did have a crease going through it. Blister also had some dents to it, but the bottom of the stem for the blister also had some pretty noticeable dents to it. You can see right there. Nothing terrible, but it would be enough. I think the blister probably is at best a 75. I think it at best overall it's a 75. And this price, though, I mean, for a 12C Jawa, 12C for $510, that's about as good as it gets, if you ask me. I thought that was a pretty good deal there for when it's probably about a 75 grade. Next up, all right, so, you know, again, this one did sell, and it was a big price, but it was also a big grade. This was an AFA 90 20-back C Death Star droid. And it was unpunched, no price sticker, single grade on that one. And it did have, you know, the kit bash rocket firing Boba Fett fully shown there on the back of the card before they started slapping the black stickers on the back there. And I don't know if this is really a 90 grade. I mean, if you look at the back of the card there, it's got, well, I take it back. This might just be the tape for the AFA, baggie that goes around it there. I thought it was some scuffing on the card there, but I don't think that's the case. I think that's just tape from the AFA bag that goes around it. But it says it's an AFA 90. I mean, you could see a little bit of edge wear there on the right-hand side. Very minor, though. But you can see a little bit of edge wear in the bottom of the card, too. Is it really an AFA 90? I don't know. I mean, I think that it's a very clean example. Don't get me wrong, but an AFA 90 needs to be basically pristine, in my opinion. And just doing a cursory search of the card, it just seems like that maybe this has had some rubbing from the very minute sliding inside the case. The ridges that hold the card in place is not perfect, right? It does have a little bit of give to where the card can kind of shift very slightly over time. And you can see a little bit on that back of the card there and on the very bottom of the card. I personally don't consider this to be a 90 grade. That's just my personal opinion, especially this price of $6,000. I mean, do I think it would sell for $6,000 if you slap this on Heritage or one of the big auction houses? Yeah, probably. I mean, we saw that AFA 90 32 back B Yoda single grade that sold for $16,000. So if I had, I'm fully speculating here, okay? But if I had to guess, I'm guessing that someone's probably going to take this and put it right back on one of the big auction houses and just roll the dice and see what happens and see if it, gets one of those huge multiples like we saw for that Yoda over at Hakes and some of the big multiples that we've seen over at Heritage this year, right? Or this past year. We saw some, AFA 95s and AFA 90s that sold for many multiples of what even an AFA 85 would sell for. So I personally think that's what's going to happen. I think that later this year, maybe 6 months or so, we probably see this get relisted in a more suitable environment for something like this. Is it an AFA 90 still? I question it. I think that if it got regraded with 3-tier grading, the card, blister, and figure subscore grading, I don't think it gets the 90. That's, again, I'm only basing it on 3 photos here. And to be able to buy something like this based on 3 photos, that's very tough to do. I mean, certainly the seller is someone that's fairly well known. I've seen this seller before, and it's got, 100% positive feedback. I'm just saying that, to me, to buy a single score graded AFA figure and thinking that it's still a 90, it's pushing it, in my opinion, in terms of your luck. But it'll be interesting to see if we find this one get relisted later this year. It was certainly a beauty, don't get me wrong. And someone did end up bidding on it. It was only one bid, but it did, end up selling at $6,000. Next up here was an AFA 85 Greedo. This was sold over in the Netherlands and did sell for $2,400. I don't think that that's probably very far off a fair market value. I know that Chris W. had a 20 back. This one was the 20 back G, 85, 80, 85 for Greedo. I know he's had a couple of them that were CAS 85s this past year. And I say this year, I'm talking about 2024, maybe even 2023, that he sold in this ballpark. It wasn't too far off of this price, maybe like a little bit less, but I don't think this one was a terrible overpay, though. This one was certainly a beauty. It was a punched example, no price sticker, though. $2,400 on that one. Here was the die-cast Imperial TIE Fighter. This one was pretty clean. The seller included a video on it so you could kind of see the condition of it, and he kind of showed all angles. I think it's probably a 75 plus or maybe a low 80, and that one did sell for $172 in an auction on 4 bids there. I thought that was worth every penny of that, though. It was certainly still factory sealed. It looked to be pretty clean overall. I think it gets a 75 plus or potentially a low 80, somewhere in that ballpark. Here we go. Here is that Dengar. Now, again, these are shrink wrapped, and they were made by the by the Sears store up in Canada. So they had several different characters that were shrink wrapped. It's a very bizarre item. And they had one for, obviously, Dengar, like you see here. This is a CAS 60 because, unfortunately, they cut the proof of purchase off the, I guess it was on the front of the card. The backs of the cards are weird. They're just like these weird perforated cards, and they're blank on the back. But this is 100% legit, blank back, shrink wrapped, Dengar ESB 608585. So, you know, it's very rare to find one of these that's still shrink wrapped and still kind of enclosed like this. But they had it for Dengar, Lobot, the Ugnaught, and the Cloud Car Pilot, I believe. Don't quote me on that. And I think it was maybe Han Bespin. You know, I'm just talking out loud here. But I know that Dengar and Ugnaught and Lobot, those are three from the Cloud City Action playset. So I'm assuming that Han Bespin was one of them as well. I don't know if the Cloud Car Pilot was, but the Cloud Car Pilot may not be one. But anyway, this Dengar is pretty rare to find one that's still actually factory sealed to the card. And while it was still a low grade, I was expecting $1,500 to $2,000, and that's about where it sold, at $1,727. So I think that was a very fair price for what it was. You could make an argument that, you know, maybe on one of the bigger auction houses it would sell for even more than that. But I think that, you know, because the card did have the proof of purchase cut out, that really holds the value back a lot. I think if that was, you know, an AFA, let's say this was at a CAS or an AFA 80, where the card was not damaged, I think you could probably double that price pretty comfortably. And it would sell for $3,000 plus. Pretty comfortably, if not more than that. Next up was the Vehicle Maintenance Energizer. This was a factory sealed Return of the Jedi box. AFA 80, that one sold for $161.38. Pretty good deal there, I think, for one that's already AFA graded. And we got three different Boba Fetts that sold, two from Gold Star Tech, and one that was not Gold Star Tech. But this was a 77 back A Taiwan Boba Fett, made in Taiwan, punched example with the price sticker on the front. Fairly heavy yellowed blister, but the card itself was in pretty good shape. Light wave to the card. But probably overall an 80 grade. I think it's pretty comfortably gets an 80 grade just based on the card there. Maybe not. I mean, it had a little bit of wear around the hang tab there that you can see. It's very faint there. Maybe the card gets a 75, but I think the blister and the figure pretty comfortably get 80s or 85. So I think you have a pretty good chance of getting an 80 on this one. And that one sold for $881, which that's a pretty low number for a Boba Fett mint on card, no matter what card back it is. 77 back A, made in Taiwan. And likewise, here was another one, and this one also had heavy yellowing to it. That one sold for $1,000. You could maybe make an argument the card was in a little bit better shape there. It looked like it had something going on there on the right-hand side, but I can't tell if that's sticker residue or a litho tear. But pretty similar condition, I'd say. You can see a little bit of a wear on the left-hand side of the card as well. But that one sold for $1,000. This one sold for $881. And then here was the Kenner Canada version of the 77 bag. This one had just very light yellowing to the blister. So this one was very attractive from that standpoint, from the blister's perspective. But a little bit more structural damage to the card. You can see lots of wear around the hang tab, another little crease that goes from the left-hand side down to about the start of the name pill for that one. But it was the Kenner Canada version. You can see on the back, it's got La Guerre des Étoiles. And the fact that I think it was, you know, the Kenner Canada version with light yellowing to the blister, those factors, you know, tend to make it more expensive, despite it being maybe not as clean of a card as we saw for the US 77 backs. And this one did sell for big money, $1,825 on 35 bids, $1,825 for that Kenner Canada 77 back. Next up, here is that Orange Snake Yoda, and Gold Star Tech had it listed for sale in a buy it now for a big number. And we have seen some of these that have sold for big numbers before. Even ones in this kind of condition. It was probably about 2 years ago that there was another one of these with the Orange Snake on eBay at auction in pretty similar condition, I would say. The blister was also kind of beat up. You can see at the top of the blister there, It's got heavy wear to it. But the orange snake Yoda on the Tri logo is very tough to find. It's very, very rare. And the number I remember that it sold for was $3,800. And, it was probably the first time we've seen one on eBay, if ever. It was definitely a long time, coming. I don't remember there being one since then that has been at auction. So this one did get listed and sold for $1,831. I would argue that that's a really good deal. It's just very tough to find it. It comes down to the fact if you're into the variants or not, right? It's got the yellow to the blister, and obviously the blister was pretty beat up, but it was factory sealed with the orange snake. And, I think that that's a pretty good number. If you look at the blister from this perspective, from this angle, it looks pretty good, right? It's just the top of the blister had a little bit of crunch to it, but looking at it from some of the other angles, it certainly presents a lot better than maybe the close-up shows. The bottom of the blister looks really good there. So I'm going with the argument that this was actually a really good deal for Yoda collectors that like to collect all the different variants of Yoda mint on card. It's just very tough to find this one, and I think that was a pretty good deal. Some Power of the Force figures that sold. This was a very clean EV99 from the same seller that had the 12 back C's. This was unpunched, no price sticker, with just fairly moderate yellowing to the EV99. I think this one gets an AFA 80 plus or potentially an AFA 85. And that was sold for $382. $382. That was a very good deal for a very clean EV99. And then here was an AFA 85 Ramba, unpunched, no price sticker. That one sold for $550. And the blister yellowing there, you can kind of see. I mean, it's got lighting on the photos there, but it does have some fairly moderate yellowing. But pretty clean example overall. 80, 85, 90 were the sub-scores on that one for $550. Here was an AFA 75 R2-D2 pop-up. Unfortunately, it popped through the blister, which is always the most terrifying part of it, right? And the blister got the 85, but if you look at it, you can see very clearly that it is poked through after grading. So it's unfortunate. It's still sold for $660, which is about what a near mint plus condition, ungraded, loose complete R2-D2 pop-up saber goes for. So that's a very fair price for what it was. It's unfortunate. Here was a Luke Skywalker in his Stormtrooper disguise. This was only an AFA 60, but it did sell for $1150 in a buy it now situation. Card 85, blister 60, figure 80, and you can see a little bit of frosting to the head on that Luke. It's just something that happens, unfortunately, mint on card with the Luke Stormtrooper, that he just gets kind of frosting that like a mold that goes inside the blister there. So that AFA 60 did sell for $1150 though in a buy it now situation. Here was an interesting one as well. I didn't see this until after it sold, but this was the Canadian version of the Yak Face on the Power of the Force card. It was only an AFA 40. AFA 40 on this one. If you're looking at the subgrades there, the card score got a 40. The blister got a 60, so it probably does have a crack in the blister. And then the figure got the 80 score. It was an archival case. So again, this is a pretty rough example, but he did get it graded from AFA to confirm that it's still factory sealed. And, again, you're taking a little bit of risk that it's going to make it to you safely, because the 60 blister score most likely means it's got a crack in it. But that one did did sell. It was listed with a starting bid of 6,500 Australian dollars, which equates to 4,063 US dollars. And somebody did bid on it. And in all fairness, a higher grade example for this would probably be 5 figures, $10,000 plus. Maybe not in the current environment. Maybe it's come down a little bit. We saw an AFA 80 or 85 that sold in an auction that fell underneath the radar and nobody saw it. And it still sold for over $8,000. But, something like this is probably better suited to one of the big auction houses. But, it probably does sell pretty close to the same number at $4,000. So AFA 40, the card's pretty rough. The blister obviously was also pretty rough. And, that's probably about the right number if I had to guess. I'm totally guessing, because it's not very often you see an AFA 40 for such a rare item. Next up and finally is another Hungarian bootleg. This was the Biker Scout on the red card. This seller had another one. I can't remember what color the card was, but he had two different Biker Scouts. This was the second of the two mint on card. It obviously did have a crack in the blister there that you can see very prominently. Stapled onto the card as all of these Hungarian bootlegs were, but very cool card art on this one. It had a big scuff on the left-hand side as well, but that one still sold for $901. The other one I think sold for about $10.50, somewhere in that ballpark. I want to say it was like a greenish card, but this red card did sell for $901 in an auction, and it was complete with the Biker Scout still, stapled to the card back. So very cool item there. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this look at recent mint on card sales for vintage Star Wars items. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll be back soon.